Hello and welcome to Composer Talks with Whitebear PR. Today, I'm very excited to have our new guest, Jackson Greenberg. Welcome to the show, Jackson.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, happy to have you. So Jackson's work has been featured heavily in many television series, including the acclaimed theme song to the Explained series on Netflix. His recent projects include AKA Jane Roe, FX Network's first foray into documentary feature films, and he has an upcoming solo album in the works. So Jackson, your most recent project was scoring for this FX documentary, AKA Jane Roe. How did you become involved in the project?
So my agent got a random phone call from someone who just basically found my information through my website. Turns out they were using a lot of my music from City of Ghosts, directed by Matt Heineman. It was a movie that went to Sundance and won a few other awards about a documentary about a group of vigilantes in Syria, kind of the only people reporting on ISIS within Syria at the time when ISIS was taking over the country. And so they were using a lot of that music in the film and as their temp music. And I guess they just decided, well, if we're temping with this score, we might as well try and find the person that made it. So they just reached out to me completely randomly. And yeah, we went from there.
How is it to write music for a film that's been temped with your music? Do you find yourself having to rip yourself off, or are they looking for something completely new and this is just kind of, guidelines?
I find it a lot less stressful than having to write to other people's temp music because I know at least if they come back to me, if I try something completely original and they say, oh, we want it to be closer to the temp, at least I know that I'm copying myself an idea that, was original to me, hopefully at some point. And yeah, I find it a lot less intimidating at the beginning of the project. And also you're like immediately establishing this connection of the filmmaker and the production team likes your music and like specifically things that you've written for the tone of the film. So it's you spend a little bit less time trying to find the right language for the movie, which is always, I think, the hardest part.
Right, of course. It is a pretty quick shortcut.
Yeah.
They just want your sound. So that's pretty flattering, I guess.
The challenge becomes how can we do that in a way that's like specific for that movie? Like the City of Ghosts score had a lot of Middle Eastern and Syrian musicians recorded on it. So it was, that part of it wasn't relevant, but the overall tone and feel and theme, I think, was. Yeah.
Now, you've told us that the documentary, AKA Jane Roe, is written like a spy or thriller movie. So what was your inspiration for that idea? And were there any other ideas you played around with to kind of get the sound on the film?
Yeah, I think just going off the last question, like, because a lot of the footage in City of Ghosts was secret home video footage from these guys that were risking their lives to be journalists in Syria, and that they were temping with that, it was kind of like that the idea of making it feel more like a thriller was inherent in the project. But I think, just this morning, I got an LA Times alert on my phone. It was like breaking news, Jane Roe was paid by the anti-abortion lobby to come out against abortion. And I think just this fact that like there was this piece of breaking news inherent in the movie, and the way that that was revealed and the way that she was kind of recruited like a spy to join the other side, it was pretty clear that that was the direction that we were going to go. I think the hard part was the easy scenes. I think for me were the scenes where they were kind of uncovering or recruiting her, and the City of Ghosts spy temp worked really well. I think the harder scenes were like the longer ones where they were discussing the court case and her explaining her childhood, which, had nothing to do with being a spy or that type of drama at all. So it was like, how do we make these back and forth between these lawyers, which we only had recordings of their voice, interesting and exciting within the context of the film.
Yeah, well, that's where music plays a really important role, especially in documentaries, obviously, because there's a lot of information, a lot of talking going on. And so the music really needs to engage the audience so that they know that they really should pay attention to this moment or whatnot. You're like you said, when it comes to lawyers talking to each other, that sounds kind of boring on paper, but if it's scored amazingly, you gotta be like, what are they saying? I gotta learn
Yeah.
everything that they're saying. Now, you've done a lot of documentaries, from Cartel Land, City of Ghosts, now AKA Jane Roe. I was just wondering, are there ever moments where you're composing that are personally difficult to work through? Because some of these are quite intense subjects. So how do you do you ever reach roadblocks that you're like, I can't watch this scene anymore? And how do you work past these moments?
Yeah, I think the times when it's like really affected me are when I'm on a longer TV show about a particular subject. Like I did a show called Afflicted for Netflix, which was about psychosomatic disease, and was working on that for months, and was making all the music from like the sounds of medical devices in the rooms of these people, like really abstract. And so was like really deep in that world. And it's definitely like by the end of that experience was like, a lot of that show is about like mold exposure and exposure to different wireless networks and people who think that these things are making them sick. And I think just living in that world and being by myself in my dark studio working on that type of music definitely had an impact of me. I
Yeah.
walked away from that being like, oh, maybe I won't do another couple months on that particular show. But I think the most challenging in that regard has been this movie that I did last year, which was called Maybe Next Year, which was Wavelength Productions, the people that did the awesome Mr. Rogers documentary.
Mm-hmm.
And they made a movie about, they had all this footage basically in Philadelphia following 4 really passionate Philadelphia Eagles fans throughout the year that they won the Super Bowl. And growing up in Philadelphia, I'm a huge Eagles fan. My dad and I went to every game growing up, and it's like a big part of my identity. So I think more than like dealing with really dark subjects and letting that affect my mind, I felt an immense amount of pressure to like really capture how important that team in that moment was, both to me and everyone else that I know from that city. And that was a really big challenge of like, because that movie was so personal to me, it took on so much more importance of like really wanting to make sure that I did a good job. And I'm really ended up being really proud of that work. So,
Oh, nice. Cool.
yeah.
Well, let's jump over to your theme song from Explained on Netflix. Now, it's gone viral, and it's gotten over 2 million streams, which is pretty incredible for a theme song of a show that's not quite like Game of Thrones or whatever. So, I just want to know why do you think this is so popular with listeners, and what has been some of the audience reactions?
I mean, honestly, I probably have to give a lot of credit to the show, because I think a lot of people, like when they comment on YouTube or on my Twitter, they talk a lot about how like listening to the music like really just makes them feel smarter and want to learn. But it's really hard to put your finger on. Like I've done a lot of these theme songs of why this particular one. I think first of all, the show is really great and a lot of people watch it. I think like Sex Explained at one point was their like number 2 or 3 show in the US on Netflix. And so like
Wow.
already it's getting a lot of exposure. But other than that, I think it's like what a lot of musicians talk about, where like you don't know, like you never know what people are going to latch onto. And I've gotten to connect with some really interesting people and gotten really interesting feedback off of that. And from people like, sending videos of DJs at clubs dropping the beat and people's reactions to that, or like someone posted on YouTube that they like took psychedelic drugs and listened to it for like 10 hours straight. And I feel really lucky to have been a part of that project. And yeah, I wish I could tell you what it is about that song that captures people's attention, but at this point I've kind of just resigned myself to it being a mystery and being okay with that, because I think
Yeah.
moving forward, like when I write new stuff, I'm like, well, okay, I don't really know how that happened, but I know that when I wrote it, I was just trying to put my best foot forward and do something that felt interesting. So I think in the back of my mind, I'm like, if I can continue with that same process, maybe the music will continue to resonate with people moving forward. But I also think that's like one of the really great things about being a film composer is like, you don't have, as opposed to like putting a song out that goes on the radio, like you don't have to be thinking about how it's going to be resonating with the audience. Like you really just have to think about, is it helping the film? Like, is it helping the scene? And so it helps you stay really present and not worry too much about, public perception, other than the perception of your director who might, veto the song 5 seconds after listening to it.
Or network notes, as you said earlier.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, you've worked in a lot of documentary type projects. Is there any other type of career goal that you have, something that you would love to score, whether it be a superhero movie, sci-fi? I'm just curious.
Yeah, definitely science fiction. I think Johan Johansson was a huge hero of mine, and his score for Arrival and Sicario were like, some of my favorites. And I think I'm just personally drawn the most to those science fiction movies that are grounded in reality. Um, I feel like they take place of this earth, like Arrival, but um, obviously something's a little bit different. But yeah, I think also just the way that I compose in terms of like experimentation with different guitar pedals and different analog synthesizers, like lends well to making like unique and original sounds and instruments. And beyond that, I think, career goals, I try to just focus on working with interesting people, nice people, people that are going to challenge me. I like to always feel challenged. And I also have a lot of my own kind of career goals separate as a composer and an artist outside of film and music TV. So it's been really great to be able to balance those two, of like getting consistent work with film and TV and also spending time making my own music on the side.
Yeah, and so part of your own music is you're releasing a solo album. And can you just tell us kind of what it's called, when can people can expect it, and what's unique about it?
Sure, yeah. So I was producing a song. I also produce kind of some pop and indie stuff for some local artists, and was producing a song for a friend of mine whose artist name is Tomi. And we were looking for some interesting sound or some interesting sample, and I had the idea that maybe I would go back through the voice notes on my iPhone and see if I had recorded anything interesting that could kind of be thrown in the mix. And in doing that, just kind of spent a whole day going through everything, and discovered that like over the last 3 or 4 years, I had recorded a lot of improvised solo piano pieces just on my iPhone. Like one was at my uncle's house on his piano, one was at an Airbnb, one was at a friend's studio. And so each of these pieces, had like a unique piano, but also they were recorded without any intention or purpose to use the music, which I think is really unique for me personally, who's like often writing to picture and other things. And I don't know, there's something about reflecting on all of that and putting it together in kind of one playlist where all of a sudden it felt like a really nice story or like journey over the last couple of years of myself as a composer. Um, and so, yeah, the album's called Voice Notes 2017 to 2019 because they were all recorded on my iPhone over that period. It's chronological. And I got really lucky that my friend Chris Sorum, who is a mixing engineer for Rufus Wainwright, helped me mix the album. And in that process, we kind of were able to manipulate the sounds in a live setting that kind of paid homage to how each piece was recorded live. So I'm really excited about that album. And it has a kind of nostalgic quality to it just because of it reminds me of different points in my life. So at the moment, I'm trying to pair each piece with like a home video from my childhood, my father's childhood, and my grandfather's childhood, to kind of work in chronologically way to be this like document of these 3 generations of my family, which has been really interesting, like going back through the digitized versions of my father's home videos from when he was a baby. It's really trippy.
Yeah.
And I think
Wow.
maybe there's something about like working with picture, that like even approaching it from the other direction of like starting with the music and then putting it to picture is like something that I always really enjoy. So it's fun to bring that into that work as well as the film scoring.
Very nice. Yeah, it sounds really personal and really intimate, this upcoming album.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. And it's really different. I think the last album, or it was a little EP I put out, was like a big symphonic orchestra piece and a chamber piece. And um, yeah, it feels nice to be putting out something completely different from that. Yeah.
Well, talk about something completely different. Your first job was assisting Randy Newman, and I just want to know what was one of the biggest lessons you took away with working with him.
I think there's two things I think about when I think about my time with him a lot. And the first is that it's okay to be nice even when you're successful. I think like there's this culture, especially with some film composers and in Hollywood, of like you have to pay your dues and you have to really suffer in your first job. And he's one of the nicest people I've encountered. And I think pairing that with like looking at how much success he's had, it really kind of broke down that stereotype for me of like, in order to be successful in LA, you have to be kind of mean. Um, the other thing is that, when I was assisting him, he was really great about like asking me what I was working on and what my goals were. And I had a meeting with an agent, a film composer agent who I won't name, who asked me what I wanted to do, and I kind of spoke about it similar to how I just spoke to you about it, about like wanting to be a composer, but also wanting to be an artist. And he kind of just looked at me and was like, kid, you got to choose a lane. Like, you got to choose a path and just stick with that. Like, people won't be able to handle multiple like goals and information. And Randy like very specifically pushed back on that and encouraged me to basically just do as much as I wanted to and as much as I could. And I think coming from him, someone who like had success in both those areas, who's like in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for his songwriting, and also has multiple Oscars for his scores, like having someone like that say like, I believe in you very early on in my career was invaluable. Or not invaluable, it's valuable. And
No, you could say invaluable. Yeah. There is no price. It's
there's
priceless,
no
as Randy
price.
said.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It's just like, yeah, priceless. I don't think I would be where I am today if I hadn't gotten that encouragement from someone like him, who I really looked up to.
Yeah, well, and you see a lot of crossover artists that are doing their own kind of artistic, solo albums and doing film composing. Obviously, Johan Johansson, you mentioned, Hildur Gudnadottir, Dustin O'Halloran, all these people are doing
Yeah,
all of
Johnny
it.
Greenwood, exactly. And it's
Johnny Greenwood, yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Well, good. Well, I hope that obviously you continue on that path and are able to explore all avenues of music. And thank you so much for taking your time and chatting with us on Composer Talks with White Bear PR. If anybody's interested, please go to our YouTube channel to see other conversations with composers. And thank you so much again, Jackson, for joining me.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you.